Ladies and gentlemen, the next event is about to start. Please take your seats. Thank you.
Oh, that's funny. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here and giving us the time to listen to what we have to say. And thanks for those online who are listening in as well. We are Archireef. We're essentially a company that bets on alternative methods in engineering and applies them to environmental projects, including coral reefs. Amongst other things today, we'll be talking about coral reefs and the reef tiles that we've developed in the process. But we generally want to highlight some of the projects that would be available in this space from reef to shore. I'm Dennis. I'm the co-founder and chief commercial officer at Archireef, and I'm joined here today by my co-founder Vrico Yu, who's also our CEO and is a marine scientist by trade. Also joining us is Haley on the right-hand side here. She's our sustainability lead and comes from a sustainability and economy background. Today, we'll essentially walk you through our Hong Kong origin story. So we'll give you an idea as to how we came to, use these methodologies in restoring coral reefs, why we chose Hong Kong as the first place to start, and as to how that has influenced our way outside of Hong Kong as well. Then we'll give you a bit of background on coral reefs, generally speaking, how they are doing. We've listened to a lot of the stressors that they're going, that they're being put under pressure by, and we'll give you a bit more insight into that. And finally, I think we'll move into the place where we talk about the 3D printing and the methodologies that we apply in restoring coral reefs. We'll have a bit of an interactive segment because we're working with partners in the Middle East to deploy our first structures in this region, and you get to have a chance to ultimately draw a coral reef tile that we've developed that will be the anchor point of the deployment that we do in the Middle East. So that might be quite interesting for you guys. And finally, we'll give you an oversight of or an overview of marine ecosystems other than coral reefs that could be approached in the same way with the same engineering, unique engineering efforts. Before we get to that, I know this is a much larger crowd than I expected. So before we get to that, we would actually like to ask for your contribution, if you can. We've got a couple of QR codes on either side of the stage. And we're just going to ask you 3 simple questions that might play a role later on in the presentation. So if you could answer them for us, that would be great, and we'll reveal the results later and see how that contributes to what we do. I'll walk you through those questions very quickly here. So we'll be looking at these 4 locations and where you might think has the largest variety of hard coral species. We'll also look at how many people coral reefs actually provide food for all around the world. And finally, we want to have an understanding as to what of these or which one of these you think has the most ancient features. So let's get into the origin story. So as I said, we're a company from Hong Kong. That's where we started. To many of you in the room, arguably this is the picture that you have in mind when you think of Hong Kong. It's an urban metropolis, it's vibrant, it's busy, there's high rises, and there's very limited space for nature. But to us, this is actually what Hong Kong is really like. In fact, 40% of Hong Kong is protected, and land developments are not allowed in certain areas of the territory, allowing for space such as the one that you see on the screen here. We're very connected to the oceans, we're very connected to the water, and we're very connected to our hills and countryside as well.
And I have that first-hand experience. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and one of my favorite thing to do in Hong Kong is to go diving and snorkeling. In fact, the next time if you're ever stopping by Hong Kong, even just for a day, you can easily fit a schedule to explore the ocean because it's so accessible. No matter where you are in Hong Kong, where you stay, it will take you no more than 60 minutes to get to the water. And if you're lucky, it's very likely that you will find a small patch of coral community just very close to just offshore. And this is a photo of me diving in Hong Kong in a place called Sharp Island, the eastern side of Hong Kong. And as you can see, there's an extensive fauna bed. And what is interesting about diving in places like this is that, as you can see, it's very shallow, so you don't necessarily need to have a scuba gear. Just snorkeling, you can see everything. And the best part diving in Hong Kong is that you can look for so many critters. Corals are interesting, and disclosure, I'm a coral biologist, so I like corals. But what makes coral particularly interesting is about the biodiversity that they support. These are just a few examples of the photo that I've taken in Hong Kong. Anemone stream, crowfish, clownfish. The one in the middle tried to bite me because she was trying to protect her eggs. But also the other animals that you can find a tremendous amount of biodiversity associated with coral communities. And coral itself in Hong Kong are also very interesting because they are very resilient and often referred as the super corals around the world because they have been surviving in the last few decades of pollution, climate change, anthropogenic stressors, but they're still there. For a coral like this in the photo, this one is about 1 meter tall. It's a brain coral, or if any scientist is here, it's called plagiar as well. And for a coral of that size, they have been there for thousands of years without, and still persist today. So going back to the question that you guys have just answered, which of the following places have the largest variety of hot coral species? Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, the answer is Hong Kong. So I guess it's unsurprising. In fact, in Hong Kong, we can find close to 90% of hot coral species. And that is more than the other places that we have mentioned here. But they're under threat. So now we will talk more about the importance of coral reefs and how they're doing. So all coral reefs in Hong Kong, globally, they account for less than 1% of the total ocean, yet they account for more than 25% of all the marine life that we can, total recorded marine life. So this is just some examples of photos, again, taken in Hong Kong. But they're under tremendous pressure. And I believe that all of us here attending physically or virtually will know that we must have read news about coral reefs are dying. We have lost 90% of coral reefs almost every year now. And I would like to share my firsthand experience of climate change. In 2014, when I was diving in Hong Kong, there's a small patch of coral community disappeared in just 2 months. I've always been a science student, but I've never expected that I can witness that in such short period of time. I've seen a small patch of coral community going there every week, saw them having lesioned, decayed, and disappeared with just such short period of time. And what we're seeing in Hong Kong is not just a local issue. It is a global issue. In fact, we have already lost 50% of all coral cover since 1950. And if nothing changes, 90% of all coral communities around the world will be gone. So what does that mean?
So 90% of all coral communities being gone around the world will ultimately have an impact on a number of industries. There might be an economic connection people want to make to certain places. And in our case, we're looking at, for example, the reef tourism industry. That industry today is worth around $36 billion a year. But ultimately, with no reefs around, reef tourism cannot happen because you have no place to dive, as a result of which tourism disappears and the jobs associated with the tourism industry will come under threat as well, probably leading to more migration towards larger cities and land. The fishing industry, I think none of these are new things to you guys. So the fishing industry is obviously very dependent on coral reefs as well. In direct correlation with coral reefs, 1.2 billion people around the world, that's about a sixth, I guess today, get their food from coral reefs. With that, with the threat of biodiversity being gone, there's ultimately not going to be enough fish to fish, and there's not going to be enough variety to provide for those that need this desperately as food and as an industry. Again, resulting in people looking for other jobs, probably a huge amount of increases in people in jobless situations and so forth. And finally, if you look at coastal communities like the one here in Sharm el-Sheikh, coastal communities benefit from coral reefs in the sense that they provide a bit of a protection not necessarily as much as, let's say, mangroves, for example, but there is an imminent need for coral reefs to protect certain coastlines. If that isn't the case, coastlines come under threat from the likes of tsunamis a lot more, from a lot more wave action, and the damage that could lead to is over $270 billion in value. So unsurprisingly, and again, not news to us here, probably the UN has declared this the ecosystem, the decade of ecosystem restoration. And the key thing is, I think we shouldn't look at this as something that's unique to us or to the people in this room. People have been trying to solve this issue, and there is, I think, listened to something like 5 or 6 different talks today about coral restoration. It's nothing new, but the problem that we often see is they require a lot of cumbersome effort. They need a lot of engineering input, and oftentimes they're not scalable to the tune that corporates, for example, would like them to be. So how do you actually scale ecological restoration?
And we believe that the solution would be based on a scalable reef structures. So when we first try to solve the reef degradation in Hong Kong, we started with using traditional methods like concrete blocks, metal rebar, plastic reframes. With 4 years of failure, we were struggling to see a long-term success. After the first year, it's going well. The second year, every time that we go back every 3 months, at least 20% of them will be detached or die. So that pushed us to think outside of the box and think about something new. So then the team think about, okay, we need to create another structure that can really help to grow coral. And we have to think like a coral. So if you were a coral, the first thing that you would need is the material compatibility. The one thing that works really well with coral is natural material like clay. So we know that the product needs to be made of clay. And the second thing that we need to think about is structural complexity. Corals need to have the complexity so that they can sustain and support the life associated with them. And the third thing is that they need roots. Of course, corals itself, they don't have roots, they only grow upward. But for them to stabilize themselves in the sea bottom, they fundamentally need roots. So that's how we created the world's first 3D printed reef tiles made from clay. How it works? The clay structure itself made up of 3 layers. The bottom layer would be the standard structural layer, and the top layer, which is the interesting part, is that we incorporate biomimicry in the algorithm-based design, which means that this layer will be customized and locally adapted for the local species to tackle their local challenges. How it works? We source ecological data and environmental data into the algorithm, and then the algorithm designed the top layer of the reef tiles. We then 3D print them and put them into with the standardized structures, and that's the final product. And that is how it's look in the water. The other thing that we also want to think about when we design a product is that it has to be easily deployed. For example, these reef structures is about 50 centimeter vertex to vertex. Each one weighed about 15 kilogram, easily managed by a certified diver. So as you can see, we select site where there's limited life in the water. We're basically choosing barren sea floor because that's where the magic happens. We renovate the sea floor with these reef tiles so that the coral will stand a chance to stabilize themselves in a unflavorable substrate. And this is the impacts that we can see after 1 year. As you can see, it's not just that the background is now covered with the reef tiles, but more importantly, they're seeded with life. Not just coral, but also oyster. And the cuttlefish in the middle, as we were taking a photo of this one, she was trying to lay eggs under the reef tiles right behind her. So this is the encouraging result that we're seeing, that it's not just about enhancing the reef structures or creating another ecological traps to replace coral reef. We want to give them a kickstart, so that they can recover and create and be the natural architect in enhancing the degraded marine ecosystem. In terms of our performance, right now we're securing 98% survivorship over the course of 2 years, which is at least 4 times higher than the traditional methods. We also benefit from high scalability of the technology that we use, 3D printing and an algorithm-based design. So that allows us to quickly scale across different locations without the reiteration of overdoing the design over and over again. We also have our own eco-engineering facility, meaning that the ideology of creating a locally adaptive product to different places can easily be realized within our own facility in creating new products. To summarize, our product is more eco-friendly, highly scalable, and cheaper when it comes to larger scale deployment, especially now at a scale that we can combat climate change. At the same time, we are also securing an industry-leading survivorship, meaning that we want to make sure that the reef structures that we create has longevity and it's going to be self-sustaining in the future.
In terms of how we market the product and operate it, we're ultimately a for-profit company. So we're not really ashamed of that because we feel as though the private sector should take some of the burden. And because we talked about a lot of inaction in and around this event this week as well. But what we do is we drive a B2B model where we sell to our clients on the basis of size of deployment that they would go after. So it could be 20 square meters, 40 square meters, you name it. And based on the size of that deployment, they pay us a setup fee and then subscribe to a service whereby we maintain the reefs and deliver reports back to them that might not necessarily align with the more common and standard reporting systems that they have in place, but that allows us to report genuinely on the performance of those reefs. Again, we started as a B2G company, if you like. So our first customer was the Fisheries Department in Hong Kong. And that was a very long conversation. And as it always seems to be with government entities, it took us a long time to get that project rolling. And because it took us such a long time, we kind of deviated from that and thought, why not put the burden on the private sector? And what took us 2 years with a single client in the government segment took us about 6 months to deliver at least 7 or 8 times as many clients in a much, much shorter period. So we now work with corporates across Hong Kong and Abu Dhabi in particular, with our first deployment in Abu Dhabi coming up next month. And again, in this connection between the Middle East and Hong Kong, we started in Hong Kong. That's where the R&D was built. But we have since found a second home in Abu Dhabi, where we have created this eco-engineering facility from where we can put R&D into practice pretty quickly. This doesn't just relate to coral reef projects, but it relates to projects in the mangrove space. It relates to projects in eco walls, for example, or anything that you can imagine that runs from reef to shore. The benefit that we have is we get solid science and get solid science into practice at this facility. And we aim to do more of this in the future. This is how it looks. It's not pretty, but it does the job. It's getting prettier every day, so we're adding a few touches here and there. But that's not the purpose of this facility. So we have everything from end to end. We produce everything ourselves from end to end. That way we also control the supply chain ourselves. We don't have to rely on third parties and their reputations or their practices. We actually wanted to do this a bit more extensively what comes now, but we wanted to give you an opportunity to get involved in the project. As mentioned previously, let's get to this. I'm assuming that's also not a surprise, but to go back to the original question, it's 1.2 billion. I'm going to repeat myself there in terms of the food that coral reefs provide, or the amount of people coral reefs provide food for. In terms of this collaboration I was alluding to, we're working with an investment holding company called ADQ in Abu Dhabi, and we're launching our first reef sometime next month, depending on the weather conditions. And with that being the case, we originally intended to have you play around with the clay. To be fair, we also expected a larger audience, but that not being the case, we were also not able to bring in the clay. But instead, what we've done is we've just put some pieces of paper here with a marker, where you could basically, if you want, come up and draw a biomimicry layer that you can see from the tiles that are right next to the pieces of paper. And whatever you draw, we will produce in the facility. and that will be the anchor piece of this installation in Abu Dhabi. So that will be the first piece that goes in the water, and we'll report back to you in terms of how it's performing against the ones that we did scientifically. You might be onto something bigger, but if anyone wants to come up, this would be great. If we could have a volunteer, yeah, please. More than one as well, if you want. And just to give you a rough idea, it's basically that biomimicry layer that we briefly talked about, which currently is designed by an algorithm. And the idea is for you guys to draw this and figure out how close you can get to it. And we will then create it and put it in the water in Abu Dhabi to see how it performs. And while that is happening, maybe I'll give you a bit of an overview of what we do beyond coral reef deployments. So we typically also get involved with the community. In Hong Kong in particular, we are now also a bit of a coral reef educator, if you like. So we work with schools, we work with the local community, we work with disadvantaged communities, and typically engage them in education in and around coral reefs. We get those institutions, schools, universities, and entities like non-governmental entities to actually come with us to deploy these reef tiles as and when, and to use items like 3D pens to create mini versions of these tiles to see as to whether they could have an impact in the local area as well. That's again something that we want to drive in the Middle East as well. What we've seen in places like Egypt is there's great access to the water. There's, on the flip side of that, there's a lot of threat to the water. So by maybe engaging at this level, we feel as though there might be a better opportunity to create a stronger foundation with those who will make a contribution to a better ocean. So yeah, meanwhile, this is, I guess, the most anticlimactic part of this, but we'll wait until some of these are finished. And then we'll select a few of those to be actually deployed. And I'll be back in a second.
Sorry. Can these structures be made into forms of statues?
Technically, yes. We actually had a designer do that in China. A hype piece designer created a digital piece of art from that looked a bit like a statue, which we then never translated to a statue. But technically speaking, yes, that's possible. And it could be on display. Yeah.
So while Dennis is busy answering questions, maybe I can narrate to give the online audience sort of a taste of what's been going on the stage. So we have quite a few people here on the stage, as you can see, and they are trying their best to imitate our hexagonal reef tiles. But just remember that they don't exactly have to be hexagonal. It's up to you to use your creativity and your thinking like a coral to create your own structure and to think about what corals will like and how best they will settle in. So I can already see some pretty amazing structures going on. This is really artistic and very, I can see another one that is sort of looking like sea waves, ocean waves. That's very pretty. And then I see another one that has sort of seashells pattern. That is very creative as well, because the marine ecosystem is one big family. And next to coral reefs, of course, there are bivalves and other seashells. Yeah, we're just allowing more time for the participants on the stage to have their drawings. Oh, you're finished. Would you like to share with the audience or the online audience? Amazing. Would you like to tell us more about the concept behind?
So the concept, it's about the circles of life and the universe and how we're a drop in this ocean, and there's mussels, like the mollusks thing, like not the mussels, the other ones. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, we'll keep this one. Yeah, so we can choose one that our engineers feel like is the best, and then we'll actually deploy it in Abu Dhabi. Thank you.
How do we know?
We'll get your contacts afterwards if you guys wouldn't mind. Then we'll send you updates. Thank you.
This is awesome as well. Would you like to share a few words on your design?
Okay, so it's not about the circles of life, but I left a little Easter egg inside. So if it's installed, it has my name on it. So I hope it gets installed.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Oh, you're done as well. Thank you. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I guess it looks like waves, and also the complexity allows the corals to really establish. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I like how it looks like ocean waves. Thank you. Yeah, let me check in with the other audience on the stage. Oh, I see some writings on there. It will be tricky for us to 3D print this, but we'll try our best. And oh, thank you. Would you like to describe your products?
It's a lot of squiggles and a heart, and I also put my name in it because I'm a bit, yeah, I just thought it'd be fun. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for coming up. Yeah, I guess we can. Afterwards. Thank you. Yeah, so while our other audience are busy on the stage, if I could please go to the next session. So yeah, we're talking about how Archireef has been doing in the past 2 years. And now we want to go on and talk about our future. And if I could highlight what Dennis and Frico have been talking about earlier, there are 3 key strengths that we have at Archireef. And that would be the flexible modular systems that make our reef tiles highly scalable. Scientifically proven methodologies, for example, environmental DNA, which we can now quantify our impacts on enhancing biodiversity. And last but not least, the little engineering efforts that we put in to make very complex environmental problems simple. And this is in the middle of all of these 3 strengths is how we position Archireef. And this is how we envision the future of us as well. And to put things into perspective, what does that mean? Allow me to give you an example, and that would be the coral highway. So for centuries, human civilizations have been settling along traditional highways, and human has been prospering along the highways. There is a highway between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Now imagine the same highway but underwater and with corals. And this is what we mean by coral highways. So corals will not only settle in, saving tons and thousands of coral fragments, but also remember what Frico shared earlier. 25% of all marine life depends on coral reef for survivorship. So by saving corals, we're not just building coral reefs and saving coral as a species, but also we're bringing other marine life to this residents, if you will, to move in and become one of the neighborhoods. And although that sounds like a huge project, and I'll admit it is, what we can do is, with our little engineering efforts, we do not need heavy machinery to deploy them. Just single divers literally holding the reef tile, putting it at the bottom of the ocean, and that we have installed reef tiles. And I'm repeating myself here, but our reef tiles are highly scalable. They're modular, so they are adaptive to the uneven waves or unevenness of the bottom of the seafloor. They're flexible and they're durable. And I would like to zoom out for a little bit and take you guys on a world tour, if you like. So first of all, at Staten Island, in 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit, and 2 dozens of people were killed in this event because of the massive waves that hit this low-lying island. So after the incident, people were thinking how we can minimize wave action and its damage to the coastal communities. And initially, they came up with a multi-use elevated promenades with a high seawall. And those high seawalls were traditional high seawalls that were similar to the walls here. They're high, they're tall, they're smooth on the surface. So it's hard for marine life to grab onto them or pass through to the coastal communities and pass nutrients or species and form one whole ecosystems. And then they did some feasibility studies, at the end, they came out with this style. So what's good about this is that instead of blocking the waves, they're actually breaking the waves. So you don't need as high as a structure, and it also looks better, and it allows seawater to pass through so that nutrients get transported inland, so marine life doesn't get cut off. On the other side of the world, we have Taiwan and their mangrove pots. So these mangrove pots are made from concrete. And in the beginning, this concrete wall would have mangrove seedlings put onto the pots. The mangrove seedlings will grow. And then later, as you can see in the picture, the roots will grow out and they will establish themselves. They will grab onto the soil. And what I find most intriguing about this project is that the reversal of the role between protectors and protectees. What I mean is that in the beginning, the concrete pots are there to anchor the mangrove seedlings, providing a nursing ground for them to grow. But at the end, actually, because of the interlocking nature of the roots and how established the root systems are, they're actually anchoring the mangrove pots themselves against wave action. So that was very interesting to me. And I know what you're thinking. Concrete. Is Haley only going to talk about concrete? Yes, but this time I'm talking about bio-enhancing concrete. So this design is from Israel, and you can see this cubical concrete that is on the picture. They look quite different from traditional concrete walls. As you can see, there are different patterns on them. And just like what we do in Archireef, they're also adaptive biomimicry. So there are holes for fishes to go through, and there are seashell patterns for marine life to easily grab onto them, to pass through them. And so the disturbance to the ocean and marine life can be kept minimal. So wrapping up of our world tour, if you will, you can see that seawalls is a huge opportunity for eco-engineering, not just for eco-engineering, but for the world as well, to use innovative solutions and save the nature. And so at Archireef, actually, we're moving from reef to shore. At the moment, as we speak, we're developing different structures using our same capabilities, 3D printing, scalability, and high adaptiveness. We're going to make to have our own solutions to seawalls. And to conclude, this is the answer for our 4 and number 3. Which of the following animals have the most ancient features? Most of you actually got it right. It's the coral reefs. So I'm very proud of you guys, and now I'll pass the time back to our CEO, Frickel.
Oh. Thank you, guys. You guys' participation really makes the best of this session. So just to close the session of today, I would like to emphasize that ecological restoration is not a panacea to climate change, nor it is an alternative to fight climate change. We still need to cut down our carbon emissions and do in a way that we can fight climate change in any possible ways. But for us, taking the first step and giving the nature a quick start to recover will be something that we can do, and we can do it more effectively with a science-based approach. So join us in our journey in creating the next generation coral reef highway, starting from the Middle East and to rest of the world. And if you guys are interested in first seeing your product going live in our social media and more of our story in how do we use 3D printing technology and science-based solutions in accelerating coral reef recovery and beyond the marine ecosystem, stay in touch with us. We would love to be connected. Thank you. Thank you again for your time. One last thing, for those that have come on this stage, make sure that you have your names and also email on the drawing so that we can give you update afterwards. Thank you again.
Awesome.